I'm today's stand-in, so I'm under no pressure at all. Trying to take the place of both Alison and Lisa, but they have very good reasons for not being here, and they do send their sincere apologies. The ability to undertake reliable and relatively inexpensive DNA analysis on ancient human remains has been hailed by Professor Christian Christensen as the third great revolution in archaeology. The first being the establishment of archaeology as a discipline in the 19th century, and the second being the radiocarbon dating revolution from the mid-20th century onwards. Within the last 13 years, there has been a step change in the methods used in ancient DNA analysis that has meant that now, quickly and relatively cheaply, and without having to worry about modern contamination, we can get information about people's total genome, not just the information about their maternal ancestry from the mitochondrial DNA, or about their paternal ancestry from their Y chromosome. This means that each individual's data gives us information about all their thousands of genealogical ancestors. This is an incredibly powerful tool in helping us to understand who we are and how we got here. Moreover, total genome analysis can spectacularly reveal the most intimate of details, not just people's hair, skin and eye colour and blood type, but in the case of this 4,000-year-old man from Greenland, it could tell that his earwax was dry and that this was an adaptation to the extreme cold conditions in which he lived. Similarly, in the case of this 10,000-year-old man, whose remains were found in a cave in Cheddar Gorge in Somerset, the geneticists from the Natural History Museum were able to tell that he had dark skin. You probably saw the TV programme about him that was repeated recently on Channel 4. Needless to say, this got the far-right racist Twitterati into a right lather. This is one of the unfortunate consequences of discovering that we are all, in fact, descended from immigrants. Cheddar Man's distant ancestors will have walked into what is now England from the landmass that is now Europe, and which was joined to Britain until the first hard Brexit occurred around 6000 BC. Scotland's archaeology has benefited from this great DNA revolution over the last 4 years, thanks to a couple of major research projects and several smaller initiatives. During the Society of Antiquaries of Scotland 2015 Rind Lecture Series, it was argued that the time was right to get some ancient DNA analysis done on Scotland's ancient inhabitants. Professor Ian Armitt took up the challenge, and together with Professor David Reich of the Harvard Medical School, they launched his GenScot project. Its aim was to create baseline DNA data for Scotland from the Neolithic through to the Viking period. They have since gone on to launch another project called GenLab, which focuses in more depth on the first millennium AD over the whole of Britain. Independently of that work, Professors Ian Barnes and Matt Thomas of the Natural History Museum and University College London got a welcome grant to look at changing diet and illness in ancient Britain. They were particularly interested in the major dietary change involved in the Mesolithic-Neolithic transition. In addition, there have been various other initiatives. By the University of Copenhagen Geogenetics Lab, including a project that set out to compare Orcadian and Scandinavian Vikings. Others by the Universities of Stockholm, Adelaide and Huddersfield. In fact, so much research has been going on, and so much of it has involved human remains from National Museums Scotland, that Alison has created a roundup list of all the ancient Scottish individuals who have been sampled or analysed for DNA, and the outcome is an astonishing 267, of whom, largely by chance, a whopping 40% were buried in Orkney. Much of this work is still in progress and only some of the genetic results have been published. However, hot off the presses, Alison's Roundup is published today. There are a small number of copies available for those that are interested, so it's first come, first served. Okay. In DES Volume 19 that you will receive today if you're a member of Archaeology Scotland, as I say, Paula Milburn has kindly run off several copies of the list that you're welcome to pick up. It's also available online in the DES website. So, what do all these analyses tell us? If we start with the Mesolithic-Neolithic transition, the Wellcome Project has confirmed that farming was indeed introduced to Britain by immigrants from the continent, who had already been growing crops and herding domesticated animals there for over a millennium. Alison is particularly pleased with this result, as it confirms what she's been arguing for many, many years, from the evidence of structures and artefacts all along. You can read all about the results in the paper by Selina Brace et al. In the online journal Nature, Ecology and Evolution. You can access it for free if you use the link shown at the bottom of the slide. As you can see from this plot of results, the genetic makeup of Mesolithic hunter-gatherers, including Cheddar Man, and also including a Mesolithic man from Knock Coig on Oronsay, is quite distinct from that of the farmers. So fresh blood was quite literally being brought in. The genetic signature of the Mesolithic individuals, ringed in red on the diagram, plots with those of other hunter-gatherers in Western Europe, showing that they were descended from the same distant ancestors. In contrast, the farmers' data inside the green oval plot fairly closely with those for farmers in Iberia, and much further back their ancestry can be traced to the Middle East. But this is where we have to be careful in how we interpret genetic data. These results don't actually mean that farming groups were sailing up to Britain all the way from Spain and Portugal, contrary to what another recent DNA project has concluded. Archaeologically, there's not a shred of evidence for our Neolithic having any Iberian characteristics. Instead, we know that over the course of the late 6th to 5th millennia, the spread of farming in Atlantic Europe came up the coast, with people in Brittany and other parts of northern France mixing with those of Iberian ancestry. In this way, farmers living in northern France will have had an Iberian element in their genetic makeup. Unfortunately for us, bone scarcely survives in Brittany, and moreover, not a lot of whole genome DNA analysis has been done in France. What little has been done has confirmed that there is an Iberian element in the genetic makeup of northern French farmers. So the genetic data are not incompatible with Alison's multi-strand model of Neolithization from different parts of northern France to different parts of Britain and Ireland. The two red arrows show the strands that reached Scotland. As for what happened to the indigenous Mesolithic population, the geneticists have argued that the genetic switch is so dramatic that we might be dealing with some kind of population replacement. In other words, the Mesolithic population largely died out. I say largely because it's clear from Rascolli Cave in Oban that there's at least one case of interbreeding between the incoming farmers and the indigenous Mesolithic population. Indeed, the two populations in Western Scotland could have coexisted without necessarily meeting each other for several generations. Once they did encounter each other, for at least some of them, it was a case of love at first sight and farewell to the fruit and nut existence. Hello, McDonald's, or something like that. We should add that there's quite a bit of resistance from archaeologists to this idea of near total population change. even though by and large it's hard to point to any communities who followed a purely Mesolithic way of life after around 3700 BC. No doubt the archaeologists and geneticists will continue to argue the toss on this for quite some time to come. The other big DNA result concerns the so-called Beaker people and confirms that the package of novelties that included beaker pottery and the use of copper and gold really was brought to Britain and Ireland by immigrants from the continent. This resolves a debate that's been going on for over a century, and you can read all about it in, shameless plug, this jolly good new book, available from Oxbow for $49.99. Alison assures me you can have it for half of that price if you ask her nicely. The DNA work on the Beaker people was done by Ian Armitt's Jane Scott project and by David Reich of Harvard. Its results were pretty spectacular. You can also read about them in the Nature article from last year by Olalde et al. You can see the title at the bottom of the slide there. The geneticists were able to say that in Iberia, which is where the earliest beakers are found, there was no genetic difference between beaker users and the pre-beaker population, which is not surprising since it's easy to see the forebears of beaker pottery there. There is also genetic continuity from previous generations. The beaker users here show ancestry from people in the Russian steppes who had moved into the area and intermarried with local farming communities around 3000 BC. But in Britain, the genetic picture is very, very different, with the early beaker users contrasting genetically with the indigenous population. This means that they must have come in from the continent. They clearly came from different areas on the continent to different areas within Britain. Some came from modern-day Netherlands to southeast England and Scotland, while others came from further down the Rhine to Yorkshire and parts of Scotland. Yet others came from northern Germany to northeast England, while others, yet again, may well have gone from Brittany to southwest England. You could lose the Boscombe Bowman's collective grave in Brittany, for example. Again, the scarcity of human bone from Brittany isn't helping with that. The geneticists got really excited by the DNA results because they suggest another significant population turnover, with 92% of the genome in Britain switching to the continental signature over the next few generations. On this graph, the continental beaker genetic signature is shown in red, and that of the earlier farmers in Britain in blue. When these results were first published in 2017, the newspapers had a field day, claiming that hordes of marauding Dutchmen bopped off the late Neolithic builders of the Sarsen bit of Stonehenge. The answer to the particular question posed here, however, is no. Indeed, there's a lively debate between archaeologists and geneticists about just how many immigrants did come from the continent and over how many years. The geneticists like to think of a massive migration, but there's simply no archaeological proof of this. Dutch settlements didn't empty out, for example, and there's no obvious crisis that would have precipitated large-scale movements of refugees. Indeed, when Alison asked David Reich how many promiscuous Dutch Casanovas it would have taken to bonk their way around Britain to create such a big genetic turnover, 50, 500, 5,000, he said he just didn't know. Indeed, the evidence from monuments and material culture suggests that we're more likely to be dealing with successive episodes of small-scale migration from the continent, over several generations rather than one big wave of immigrants. If local women were attracted to these sexy foreigners and preferentially intermixed with them, then this would help to account for the 92% genetic turnover. Scotland has one or two proven immigrant Beaker people, as at here, Sorisdale on Call, where this young woman's grave is among the earliest Beaker graves in Britain. Isotopic analysis of her teeth and bone by Mike Parker Pearson's Beaker People project had already indicated that she hadn't been brought up in the area, and her DNA closely matches that of Beaker users on the Middle Rhine. So here we may well have a first generation immigrant from what is now Germany. There are a few other early Beaker graves in Scotland, such as this distinctly continental style grave with its continental style Beaker from New Mill in Perth and Kinross. The grave was probably for an adult man, to judge from the presence of the flint striker light for making fire. You see that Alison's said Dutch on the slide, but actually you do find this grave form and Beaker type in parts of Germany and France as well. Unfortunately, because the grave pit for the wooden chamber was dug into gravel, the acidic groundwater has destroyed all traces of the skeleton that was once there. If the body had survived, Alison feels fairly confident that he would have come from somewhere along the Rhineland. A generation or two later, there's the now world famous grave of a young woman who's been called Ava from Achavanik and Caithness. Maya Hull's project threw the full analytical monty at this young woman, and the facial reconstruction done by Hugh Morrison on the basis of the DNA results shows that she had the kind of skin tone that we see nowadays in the Mediterranean. She wasn't a first generation immigrant, but her parents or grandparents on both sides had come from the Netherlands. You can read all about her in our prize-winning article in the current volume of the Society's proceedings. There isn't time to go into the results of the other DNA analyses that have been completed for Scotland, but we can report that the University of Copenhagen PhD on the population genomics of Vikings was able to show close genetic ties between Norse period individuals in Orkney and those in Norway, confirming the picture obtained from other sources. Ashot's research also revealed various pathogens that had been brought across from Norway, including hepatitis B and the human herpes virus. Thanks a bundle, marauding Vikings, for your sexually transmitted diseases. It's hoped that Ashot will publish his results on the Scottish individuals soon. Now, DNA analysis is not just applied to humans. You've all probably seen this facial reconstruction of a cute Neolithic dog from Coween Passage to Orkney. It's a world first for canine forensics. The DNA of this dog is currently being investigated by Professor Gregor Larsson at Oxford University, and that analysis will tell us whether the forensic artist got the dog's eye and fur colour right. Of course, who could forget the wonderful Orkney voles? Their genetic makeup is today only found in Orkney, and they must have come in from the continent on one or more boats around 3200 BC. Work by Andrei Romaniuk has shown that they were cooked and eaten as a handy snack at Skara so they may well have been used as a self-renewing food source on the long sea journey, since they breed like rabbits. As for precisely where on the continent they originated, the DNA project that tried to tackle this was stymied by the absence of Neolithic samples from Iberia and France, the most likely areas of origin. So if you read the results, it says Belgium was the source area, but that's actually nonsense, as the comparanda were from a medieval Belgian nunnery. This is a further cautionary tale about how careful people have to be when dealing with DNA data. Time's nearly up, but Alison and Lisa wanted to say a little about the nitty-gritty of DNA analysis and the future for Scottish DNA work. If you want to get DNA analysis done, the best parts of the body in terms of its survival are the petrous temporal, it's behind the ear, on the inside of your skull. This is where the densest bone in the body is, and cementum surrounding tooth roots is a good second option. The sampling for DNA has to be done by specialists in special clean DNA labs. This is Tom Booth taking samples at the University of York. He's very skilled in drilling small and unobtrusive holes to obtain his samples. This is a drilled petrous temporal from Yarrow Kirk. The cost of DNA is a little difficult to predict. The University of Huddersfield lab says it varies widely according to whether there's much DNA surviving. If a sample fails at its first screening, it's £50. If it passes but is only of middling quality, it can cost £1,000. If it's well preserved, it can be as little as £250. NMS have never had to pay, as the work has always been done as part of big projects that I mentioned earlier. Fortunately, there are 2 brand new big projects starting up now. Ian Armit has just secured a big ERC grant for his Comios project, and Tom Booth will be working on a project called 1,000 Ancient British Genomes at the Crick Institute in London. So both Ian and Tom are on the lookout for many, many new samples, mostly from the Bronze Age onwards, but earlier ones are accepted too. That is, of course, very good news for Scotland. Finally, the creation of an ancient DNA database for Scotland had been identified as a priority task excuse me, for Lisa Brown as the new Archaeological Science Manager for Historic Environment Scotland. It had also been identified as a priority in the SCARF National Research Framework and in Scotland's Archaeology Strategy, which was launched in 2015. This strategy is designed to be used and be of benefit to everyone in Scotland. Alison's creation of... Oh, what have I done? Back. I've lost it. Sorry.
Carry on. No. Carry on.
Alison's creation of the Scottish DNA Roundup list is the first step towards the creation of Historic Environment Scotland's DNA database. And Lisa is working with her colleagues to make the database a reality. The aim is to bring together all the information that currently exists and new data as it's generated, and to make it freely accessible to researchers and the public alike, with hot links to the DNA Lab's libraries of raw genetic data. It's important to ensure that this information is also captured within the National Record of the Historic Environment on Canmore. The aim is to have automatic upload of the information on the relevant Canmore records, but in the meantime, it will be entered manually, just as radiocarbon dates are. We also need to make sure that the information is kept up to date with results released quickly, and that new projects are added to the database as soon as they start. To that end, Historic Environment Scotland need to maintain close contact with NMS, with other museums and with excavators to find out what work's actually happening. Alison's template that was used in the DES Roundup list will be widely circulated, so that when museums grant permission to sample human remains, the template can be filled in and returned to the museum. So if you know of any skeletons who are about to be sampled, please let Lisa or Alison know. Email address is at the bottom of the slide there. The future is most definitely bright for ancient DNA studies in Scotland, so we would advise you to watch this space. Thank you.